Hey folks, so today I would like to talk about opposing viewpoints and how we can acknowledge opposing viewpoints in our own writing. Chapter 6 of They Say, I Say has some excellent information on this. That chapter is called Planting a Naysayer in Your Writing, and they have some good sentence starters and strategies for doing this. Okay. So the first thing that I would like to talk about today is why we actually build counter-arguments or opposing viewpoints into our writing, the purpose of doing this. Maybe in high school, some of you may have been told, don't acknowledge other viewpoints, right? That weakens your own viewpoint. But I think more sophisticated writers acknowledge counterpoints as a way to strengthen their own view and to establish their credibility. It shows that you're willing to look at other positions, that you're willing to acknowledge the viewpoints of others, that you're not closed-minded, but rather open-minded, right? I like this illustration to the right here. You notice the two gentlemen tipping their hats to one another as an acknowledgement of the other person's existence. That's the same idea with a counter-argument or exception paragraph where you acknowledge the viewpoint of others. Essentially, you're saying, hey, I recognize that there's other viewpoints and other perspectives beyond my own. Okay, so I want to talk about two strategies or two ways that you can do this in your writing, two types of paragraphs, right? One's called a counter-argument paragraph, and that's the first one we're going to look at. And essentially what you do with a counter-argument paragraph is you acknowledge an objection, you acknowledge an opposing view, but you discuss why it's invalid or problematic. Essentially, you're saying, some people say this, but this is why they're wrong. Okay? So in front of you is a paragraph from a student responding to the same question that you are responding to in major essay number 2, whether or not a limitation should be placed on national parks and parklands. So I'm going to ask you to take a second to read this paragraph. So please pause the video here and take a moment to read this paragraph. Okay, so this was the student's last body paragraph. They had written a lot of points. They had written several body paragraphs on why national parks should have some limitations. And then this was their last body paragraph, and I want to point out what they do. They say, however, some people like to point out that national parks are kept for the American people. And then they give this example of one person, Jonathan Jarvis, the director of national parks, who believed this, that, hey, they belong to the American people, people should have a right to come in. But then notice what they do at the end of the paragraph. They use a comparison strategy to the Department of Motor Vehicles and other government buildings that have occupancy rules, right? There's only, I think, 35 people allowed in my local post office at any one time, right? So they use that comparison or comparable to suggest why it's a perfectly okay thing to have limitations in national parks and why people like Jonathan Jarvis are wrong, right? So that's one strategy. The second strategy is called an exception paragraph. And this is essentially where you say that your argument, the point you're making, is correct, except in a specific circumstance, right? So, for example, if I were taking a position on a restaurant, I might say the restaurant was wonderful, except for the bathrooms, right? Or the restaurant was wonderful, except for the dessert, right? So notice I'm going to have a lot of information on the positives, but I might have a paragraph that says, hey, there was one downfall or there was one pitfall to the restaurant, if we're using that example. So let's go ahead and look at another student's paragraph. And you're going to notice it's quite similar to the other one, but here the student does not say that it's invalid. Instead, they say it's a valid point, right? So please pause the video and take a second to look at this paragraph. Okay, so I hope that you've had time to read the second paragraph, and I want to acknowledge some differences between the first. So notice they begin very similarly. They bring up Jarvis, but then look at the change that happens. In this paragraph, they say this is an important point to acknowledge. If parks begin to deny entrance to people, they run the risk of being discriminatory. For example, according to a recent National Public Radio report, national parks already do a good job of welcoming in individuals, or do a poor job of welcoming in individuals from various minority groups. And then notice that at the end, they say if we are going to place more limitations, we have to be aware of this potential downfall, right? So in this paragraph, instead of saying this is an invalid point or problematic point, they say this counterpoint is very important and we need to take it into consideration moving forward, right? So those are the two types of counter-argument strategies or opposing viewpoint strategies that you can use. One more piece of information, counter-arguments or exception paragraphs are often the very last body paragraph of your essay. Just another point to keep in mind. So for more information on counter-arguments, I encourage you to check out Chapter 6 of They Say, I Say.